Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Exceptional Conservative Show, live from the nation's capital. I am your host, Exceptional One, Ken McClenton. This is Open Heart Closed Case Night. Our focus is on unresolved homicides, missing persons, teen suicides, and child abuse cases. I want you to understand that there is a negative impact to the absence of the father in the household, and that the father has a very dominant role, and it can parlay into every areas that you may not necessarily think are true. We have with us tonight a very great guest. Armin Brott is with us. He is the author of the New Father book series, and you can find him at Mr. Dad on Twitter. We're going to talk about fatherhood, but also isolation kills, the epidemic of male loneliness. As a father yourself, Armin, what was one of the first things that you drew in terms of character, or at least development of your character in being a father?
No, I think I always tried to do the right thing and to set an example. And I remember there was this one thing that my youngest daughter, she was my youngest at the time, she's my middle daughter now.
Mm-hmm.
I used to take her to movies all the time. And she was maybe a year and a half old, something like that, but very, very talkative. And I decided I would take her to a movie in the middle of the day. So she falls asleep on my shoulder. And I thought, okay, you know what? Actually, I'm sorry, I got the dates. She's about 3. She's about 3. So we get to the cashier, and I'm paying for the ticket. And the guy says, "How old is that kid?" Because it was under 2 is free.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "She's 2." And he says, "Okay, no, that's all right. That's free." And the kid wakes up, or she wasn't sleeping probably, and she says, "That's not true. I'm 3." And I thought, there's a lesson for me. Do I want to teach my kids to lie to save $3 or whatever it was for a matinee? And the answer is that, no. I think I need to pay a little bit more attention to doing the right thing. And it's just one of those examples that sometimes our kids are teaching us stuff that we need to learn.
Armin, there are people out there, and we talked about this in the last segment, that basically say that the heart, because nearly 80% of some communities are filled with single mothers. And you have preachers and others who will basically tell women to stand up on Father's Day because they happen to be fathers as well as mothers. I got to ask you,
No
isn't
such
that
thing.
has this culture basically emasculated the idea of being a father? And if so, what impact has that had on boys growing up?
Well, all you need to do is just turn on the TV and particularly pay attention to commercials. But almost every show that's got a dad in it, the dad is an idiot. You wouldn't want to spend time with him. The mother treats him like he's just another kid. And if you look at the commercials that are out there, for the most part, the commercials, the dads are fools. And we know, we talk about this all the time. We know that showing really skinny models tells girls that they need to be a particular way. And we talk about the men and women of forces are male. And we talk about firefighters and police officers and mail carriers instead of what I grew up with, mailmen and firemen and policemen. And we do that because we want our daughters to grow up thinking that they can be anything that they want to be. And they can. I have no problem with that. But what we're teaching little boys by showing fathers as idiots all the time is that, well, there's no sense in trying to be an involved dad because people are just going to laugh at you anyway. And then we're also, you didn't ask about this specifically, but I see that there's absolutely a connection between this phrase that makes me want to scream all the time of toxic masculinity.
Yes.
Where we have said essentially that there is something wrong with the simple act of being a boy or a man. That just by the fact that you have a Y chromosome in there, and girls only have X's, they have 2 X's, we have an X and a Y. The fact that we have this one thing that makes us different, we're toxic. There's something wrong with us, something that needs to be fixed. And I think that's a terrible message to teach boys, is that they grow up in school, they go to school, and we're telling them that something wrong with the way that they are. And that plays out in all sorts of different ways. If you just look at what's going on in high school graduations, boys are more likely not to graduate. You look at the percentage of boys and girls in colleges, it's roughly 60-40 now, 60% girls, 40% boys. And this year, I just read this just the other day, this is the first year where there have been more females in medical schools than males. And we're
Wow.
growing up, we're creating a situation where we're going to have a bunch of undereducated guys who have no place in the world. And that, in a way, loops us right back to the loneliness thing, is because one of the biggest drivers of loneliness is a feeling of worthlessness, that you have
Mhm.
no role, that you don't feel important in anybody's life. And if you can't get out there and get a good job and earn a good living, you're going to feel loneliness. And it's going to be harder for you to attract a woman who's going to want to be with you. And you're more and more lonely. And so we can talk about this more in detail, but the short
Yeah.
of it is, as you said, loneliness, it leads directly to drug and alcohol abuse. It leads directly to suicide because
Yeah.
people don't
And
take a role in.
and Armin, I want to go to that particular segment. I want to go back just one more spot and
Sure.
reemphasize something here. You have cultural institutions, whether it's the church, whether it's the educational center, um, governance, and so on, where families virtually, that those institutions are grounded by women, especially in certain areas of the country, urban areas of the country. And they speak to toxic masculinity. They speak to worthlessness of the male child. And yet, many of these young men are babied in the households and treated like kings, uh, and then tossed out at a certain age, per se, without the guidance of a male figure. Is that detrimental in itself from the description I've given?
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, we're telling boys that there's something wrong with them, that they need to be more like women, they need to be more like girls. And then at a certain point, particularly in the communities you're talking about, where there are a lot of single moms, which means by definition that there are a lot of dads who are not involved in the care, which is not necessarily their fault. It's not because they're running away. It's because we've structured things as a society. We've structured things so that if you're a mom and you're struggling and you want to get government benefits, whatever that is, SNAP or welfare or something, and you've got the dad living in the house, you can't get the benefits.
Yeah.
So the responsible thing for the dad to do is to leave. But what we're telling these boys is, or where they get this idea, since there isn't a dad around to give them the message about what it means to be a man, is they say, what it means to be a man is to go out and beat somebody up, or
Yeah.
rob a liquor store, or do something violent, because men, we're supposed to be tough. And because we're telling them that men are tough and masculinity is toxic, and then clearly being tough must be part of a man, right?
Yeah.
So these kids grow up thinking that they need to be tough, they need to be violent in order to be masculine, and they've got a gang leader or somebody else who's a figure that they can look up to because he's maybe got more tattoos, or because he's bigger and stronger, maybe he served some time in prison and he's a real badass, whatever it is. It absolutely is detrimental, and it's a loop. I mean, what are you going to do? Do you think that it's going to be successful in encouraging a young man to want to be a father and to be an involved father if you keep telling him that everything he does is wrong?
Yeah.
Who wants to come back and be around somebody who's going to tell you that everything you're doing is wrong?
Exactly.
Nobody.
Armin, when you look at the construct of the male figure today, and certainly not like the male figures of my father's day, World War II group, um, basically, these young men have been trained to be as isolated as they possibly can be. They were isolated in their youth because their father wasn't around them. There wasn't a Boy Scouts program because that would have been offensive. Uh, there weren't any male figures in their schools except for the coach on the football team. Virtually, they've been maleless for most of their life. They've been told to be isolated. Why is that a problem? I mean, they're used to it by now, right?
Well, they're used to it, but that doesn't mean that it's a good thing. I
Yeah.
mean, all we have to do is look at what's going on. You look at the composition of people in prison, 80% male, and you
Yeah.
look at what's going on with the people of those 80%. 80% of those people grew up without a father. And if you look at the male versus female percentage of people who have reading problems, and if you have reading problems, your whole life is smaller than it should be, than it could be. Because if you can't read, you can't communicate, you can't learn a lot of things. I mean, that's not to say that people who have reading problems can't learn. Of course, they can. There are
Yeah.
other ways. But generally speaking, we get a lot of our information by looking at written things and making decisions about that. So boys who are not going to school, they're told that being smart and doing well in school is stupid. It's not what boys do. Boys are supposed to be doing other things. And so we're helping the girls get better grades, which is wonderful. Girls should get good grades. No questions about that. But the bottom line of it is that yeah, we are creating this whole situation, this whole world that we live in now, where it's just not a good thing to be a boy these days or to be a man these days, because it's the one thing you can say. I mean, you look at all what's going on with Me Too, and there is no question that some guys behave like idiots.
Yep.
I think we can all acknowledge that.
Yep.
And I think we can all acknowledge, if we're going to be honest about it, that some women behave like idiots too.
Mm-hmm.
And but if we are saying that every man is suspect of being a rapist or a sexual harasser or something like that, if that's what we're going to say, and that's kind of what a lot of people say, is, well, all men are this and all men are that. It's okay to
Yeah.
say that kind of thing. But boy, if you tried to say something like that about all women are this or all women are that or all Asians or whatever, oh my God, you'd never hear the end of it.
In,
I
in the
mean,
sense of, in the sense
you'd
of
be
lone,
fired immediately.
exactly. In the sense of loneliness, here's what I say. I hear from a lot of women. There's no way he can be lonely because he has so many friends and he has so many girlfriends in his life. How could he possibly be lonely?
Well, my answer to that is anybody who's ever been in a relationship that didn't last knows what it's like to be lonely when you're sitting right next to or sharing a bed with somebody else. The fact that you have another person with you does not mean that you're not lonely. And in fact, that can make you even more lonely, is
Mm-hmm.
being with people you just don't feel connected to or who don't value you or you don't feel that you value them. Of course, that's it. And absolutely there's a difference between being lonely and being alone. You can be alone and not lonely. Many people do. I mean, I'm a writer. I work for myself. I'm alone a lot,
Yeah.
but there are times when I really crave having another person around. And when my kids aren't here, I'm lonely. So I've got cats now. I had a dog. I have cats. Um, but absolutely, the fact that you have other people in your life does not necessarily mean you are not lonely.
There are guys who are listening tonight who are saying, I'm glad I'm watching this video by myself on my cell phone because I wouldn't dare admit that I'm feeling lonely right now. Is there something wrong with feeling lonely or being lonely? Um, what are the solutions for overcoming all of that?
Well, I think that first of all, there's nothing wrong with it. I think everybody feels lonely at some point or other. But I
Yeah.
think we need to acknowledge that for boys and men, a lot of our social life, starting from when we were young, had to do with groups, doing stuff in groups, usually sports. As you get older, you get into relationships, you start having kids, you spend a lot less time with groups of other guys. And so it's harder to find those things. Even if you're going out and playing pickup basketball games in the park or whatever, it's still harder to find a strong group of people to hang out with. So I think if there is a solution, the first step is to say, yep, you know what, I'm feeling lonely, and what I need to do is connect with another person. And you could volunteer for something, you could go to become more active in your church or synagogue or whatever, but you've got to make contact with other people, particularly, and volunteer to do something where you will be valued. That is, I think, is such an important part of it too, whether that's serving meals at a homeless shelter or driving Meals on Wheels or whatever it is. If you do something for somebody, they're going to feel appreciative, and you will feel like you've done something good, and that can help you right there. And hopefully you'll connect with other people who have similar values, and you'll be able to talk about those things. But it takes some work. It's not, people are not just going to knock on your door and say, hey, I thought you might be feeling lonely, brought a few people over to play cards.
Exactly.
Not going to happen. You're
Yeah.
going to have to reach out.
The whole idea, because growing up, for me, it was sports. I got involved in sports, and so I could be around a lot of guys. We would josh, we would play, we would communicate with one another. But after high school, it became more difficult. Is there another avenue in terms of sporting life, maybe the gym, that's an opportunity for guys to overcome the sense of loneliness?
Well, if you want to do sports, absolutely. I mean, most cities that I've heard of anyway have got sports leagues. They've got adult baseball leagues or adult softball leagues or co-ed leagues or different kinds of things. So a lot of churches have got a church leagues, so you can join a team, and that's certainly an easy thing to do. And if that's really the way that you connect with other people, that's fine. And I think another thing is that not to discount loneliness, but I think to understand that there's a tremendously big misconception about the word intimacy. Is we have the idea that intimacy is something that only applies to women. And I'll tell you something from my life, and this may ring true for you, it rings true for a lot of guys, but I think about my dad, who's still alive,
Yep, mine
and
too.
some of the most intimate times that I had with him and with any other human being in the world, as a matter of fact, were playing ball with him, where he's 30 yards away and we're just playing catch. We're not talking, but we're doing something. So you have to get comfortable with the idea that the loneliness thing, you don't necessarily have to be talking about your feelings with somebody. You
Yeah.
could be playing a game, and it's that when you feel that connection, and it's hard to articulate that exactly, but I think it's for
I,
guys who are listening, won't buy into the idea that the only way to be connected to another person is the way that a woman says that you have to do it, which is perhaps by talking about their feelings. And that may come up, and it's great if it does, but that doesn't need to be exactly the way.
and also, just one other thing, Armin, the whole idea is for women, because a lot of women would think they've been put down throughout. Number one, a lonely man shouldn't be in a relationship with a woman for the sake of overcoming loneliness. But number two, what can the single mother do to help her son going through loneliness? So if you could speak to those two things.
Well, I think she should try to set up play dates or to make sure that he's got some friends in his life, people that he can actually go to and hang out with. But this may get into some difficult situation for some women to hear, but I think one of the most important things you can do is to support your child's relationship with the father. That whether you love him or not anymore, it doesn't make any difference. But the biggest predictor of how kids are going to do in every area of life, whether it's loneliness or school performance or drug and alcohol or becoming a teen parent, has to do with the relationship between the parents. If you don't love your former partner anymore, okay, but you need to recognize that you are both important to that child, and that child needs both of you. And if you support that other person, it's going to be great for the kids, but it's also going to be great for you because you can count on them. And you can say, "Hey, I want to take a class tonight. Can you watch the kids?" Yes, instead of having to track down everybody else to do it. And the kids will have a relationship with somebody who can show them what it's like to be a man and what men do, and that being a father is a loving, caring thing, and that's something that a young boy should aspire to.
Exactly. In the case of the loneliness, a woman shouldn't enter into a man's life just because he's lonely. Am I right about that?
I think that there's a tendency to want to reach out and grab a hold of somebody and
Yeah.
maybe have sex because it'll make you feel less lonely. But if that's why you're doing it, it's probably not going to last.
Yeah. Armin Brott, we thank you so much for coming on our program. How can people find your information? How can people read your great writings?
Well, there's a couple different places. You mentioned MrDad.com, which is my main website, so you can find out all about the books, but they talk about pregnancy and the first year and the toddler years and single fathers, something for every kind of dad. And I know a lot of moms buy them for the men in their lives, so that's all available at Mr. Dad or your friendly local bookstore. If you want to read, I've been writing a lot of columns on men's health. Those are at a separate place, which is healthymentoday.com. And there, you can also send me email through either one of those sites. And I respond to everybody, try to get back to everybody. If you got questions or comments, I'd love to hear from people.
I think you're awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Brott, for being on the program
Thanks.
tonight. This won't be the
Thanks for what
last
you're
time
doing.
we'll have you on. Ladies and gentlemen,
Uh,
Armin Brott, author of the New Dad series, the New Father book series. You can find him on Twitter at Mr. Dad. You can find him at MrDad.com. Listen, I'm going to tell you all right now, for the sanctity of life, a son should know his father, even if he's behind bars. There's something about the relationship between a father and a son that a son can get from no one else. Ladies, do what you can. It doesn't mean that you need to have a relationship with the father that is intimate, but make certain that you have a connection for your son. You'll do better. You'll do much better. We'll be back with more of the best